So hello, everyone. Good to see everyone's faces. Welcome back to our community. It's been a little while. I was hoping at the beginning here, even if you're going to be kind of off camera for much of our day together today, if you're able to turn your camera on, let's all say hi to each other. Hi, everyone. I'm just scrolling through. Oh, old friends, friendly faces. We haven't been gathering as often as we did last year, and I don't know about you, but I've missed everyone. And we really wanted to keep today kind of just those of us who've been in this journey together for the last year and a half, and harvest some of what's come up over the last year and delve deeper into this study and this practice. Picking up some threads, particularly from the first year of the training. So before I start jumping in, I just wanted to say hello and that I'm really glad we're doing this, and to just reintroduce or re-welcome Corinne Luck, who's joining us from New York, who you all know already, who's joined us a couple times, and who last year in the talk that she gave, and it was a kind of broader discussion, we touched on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, but we didn't have a chance to really discuss them together. And so this is going to be a kind of jumping into the well. So Corinne, maybe before we get started, do you want to just remind us, how did you come to this work, what you're up to?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you all. Yes, my name's Corinne. I am in Brooklyn. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am an organizer by trade, and I have been for the last 20 plus years. I'm like, how old am I? Really since university, if not before. And I've been organizing in a realm of different ways with a realm of different people. And that's what I think we're actually going to, explore many of those different spaces today, or those kinds of spaces. But I came up organizing in big like protest movements and learning what organizing was in that context. And so I was at the tail end of the global protest movement, coming into it right after Seattle, for those of you who know what that reference is, and then was really engaged while at university in the anti-war effort around Afghanistan and Iraq, those two wars coming out of 9/11. And then I organized on Israel-Palestine a lot. That's been about like half of my political work around foreign policy, around Israel-Palestine. Within the Jewish community, I'm half Israeli, I'm also half English, I'm half American. That's why I sound like this. But I've also done a lot of organizing at the hyper local level, like food co-op here. It's not the Park Slope one, it's even smaller, in Brooklyn, and also done a lot of international organizing. Working with folks in the UK and Germany and South America, Central America, elsewhere. So yeah, I love all kinds of organizing. I think we need it all, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about. And I came to Upaya for a retreat many years ago, and I'm so excited. It feels like such an important spiritual sangha for me, even though I'm not there. And so I'm so glad to be doing this all with you.
Thanks, Corinne. So before we delve in to kind of what is a movement ecosystem, and the kind of framework we're going to work with today and adopt for our own activism, our own work in the world, I want to just remind us kind of where we've been. It's been such a long journey, and it's been a while since we've delved in together, that even as I was kind of preparing today, I was going back and listening to talks from last year and reading over papers. So I thought I'd just open us up, or kind of open up the wisdom that's been shared over the past year and a half by just reading some quotes from our elders, from our teachers, from those who've been with us. So you can close your eyes or leave them open, but just to hear a bit of the journey that's been shared, a bit of the path we've walked. So starting with Frank Ostaseski, our dear friend, who's shared with us through so many different lenses the last year and a half. He says, the Bodhisattva vows are impossible, but vow anyway. It's an orienting principle for us. The Bodhisattva vows are impossible. Our vows in some way are impossible, but we vow anyway. It's an orienting principle for us. Roshi Joan has shared, compassion is about serving, not fixing, managing ourselves so that we can make a difference. And John Paul Lederach shared last year, prepare and care for yourself daily. Prepare and care for yourself daily. That's the work too. Joanna Macy, who we heard from last month and who kicked this all off with us, said, among other things, care about relieving suffering, but let go of outcome. You are asked, you are called to show up. You are not asked to succeed. So care about relieving suffering, but let go of outcome. You are called to show up. You are not asked to succeed. And Lama Rod Owens last year shared with us, from I to we. We need to remember there is space to hold everything. Senator Tom Udall, in his afternoon with us, said, don't be a victim of the political system. Don't be a victim of the political system, which is a kind of tall order for us today, but he was so inspiring and reminding us we're part of it. So don't be a victim of the political system, be an actor with integrity. That was his call for us. And Cinder Rushton, talking about moral resilience, moral integrity, said, discern what part of this situation am I responsible for? It's important to discern what part of this situation am I responsible for? And then finally, from Thich Nhat Hanh via Wendy Johnson, he says, to suffer is not enough. We must also be in touch with the wonder of life. To suffer is not enough. We must also be in touch with the wonder of life. So in the spirit of these teachings and all the teachings we've shared together in this journey, we really just want to delve into our understanding, our belonging, our practice in movements as an ecosystem, their landscape, how we find ourselves in that landscape and act within that landscape. Asking these kind of fundamental questions of kind of understanding where we're usually drawn to, where we can be the most useful, which might be a different answer, and how to understand how these things evolve, the complexities of a movement ecosystem, rather than the kind of simple answers of maybe a movement moment or a piece of legislation or the things we can get quite focused on. So before we delve in, I wanted to ask everyone, what's the movement you feel most a part of or that you're kind of closest to? However you would name it. So we're going to open up the chat. And if you would just put in there, what is the movement you're most tied into or knitted into that you feel is closest to your heart? So Zoe Core says reproductive rights. Jack Greenman says home educators. Mental health and well-being. Democracy, it's a great way to put it. International labor rights. Social justice at end of life, mindfulness in law, animal rights, global compassion, eco-dharma, educational equity and access, the green movement. Many people in the environmental movement or the Stop Ecocide International movement, kind of different aspects of this. We're going to use that as our case study today, the environmental movement. So we'll delve in. Racial healing and reconciliation, human rights, free expression. You can see here in the chat what the Dalai Lama calls the compassion revolution, says Tim Harris. So, you know, it's a little bit of a setup to try and name one movement we're in, because all these movements are interconnected. But it's also necessary that we know where we're placing ourselves in the broader web of things. So kind of with that intention, the intention that draws each of us to these movements we're a part of and to the way in which we're all connected through these movements, I want to pass it off to you, Corinne, for delving into this framework.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm still reading through all of these. They're lovely. And just to let you know, you might see me like sort of sitting down, standing. My back is a bit off and the Zoom situation is not awesome. So I hope it's not too distracting, but I really miss being in a room together where my body can move. All right. Am I able to share my screen? Can I do that? Let's see. I am.
Yeah.
Hooray. Oh, hold on. No. Yeah. Here we go. All right, we'll do this and then I'll do this. You all are seeing this part. We're gonna have some slides. You didn't say anything from the Laurie Anderson one.
Do you have a quote?
No, it's just awesomely trippy. But I was just thinking about her slide. That made me think about her slides. All righty. So we are, as per the blurb, going to be talking today about movement as ecosystem. Oh, I forgot the minute you press something and the slides move. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because this is, I mean, I think so many people put some, I saw soil regeneration in there as a movement folks are part of, and more about climate, and I saw words like healing, and I think a lot about, right, how in the natural world, systems that are not diverse, right, ecosystems that are not diverse, soil that is not diverse, right, soil that doesn't have a mix and a range of nutrients, they're unhealthy, right? Like things can't grow in them. And so similarly, when we're trying to transform the world together, right, and we're just all doing one thing, that's not going to be a very healthy, a very fertile soil for something like that, right? So like when I think of movement as an ecosystem, I get really carried away with soil analogies, so and metaphors, so pardon me already, but I like to think of like a healthy movement ecosystem is like the healthy soil that has like nutrients in it and bacteria and little worms and all of this that is making growth and life possible, right? So that's why we want to be thinking about this movement as ecosystem, heterogeneous, diverse systems. And we're gonna, oh, see, every time, there it is. We're gonna use this, you're gonna see this diagram a lot. And this is kind of a view, right, that we're gonna be trying to, that we're gonna be placing things into today, right? And so you can see it's a Venn diagram. It's not, you know, it's not as pretty as a soil ecosystem, but it is a Venn diagram, and like Venn diagrams, right, there are bits that are overlapping. There, theoretically, you can move these circles around so more is overlapping rather than less. There's places where there's a couple of overlaps, places where like all three overlap, right? But this is kind of the diagram we're going to use today, and this the frameworks that we're going to be thinking about. That we're going to use a few different examples, and we'll go through a few, and we're doing that because even as we think about ecosystems, right, we're thinking about conditions within which ecosystems thrive. And conditions is a word that we think about a lot in practice, right? And we also think about it a lot in organizing, right? What are the conditions that we are living in, and what are the conditions that we want to help bring about? And this is not static, right? Conditions change and shift, and so our movement frameworks are dynamic too. Our ecosystems are dynamic. It might depend on the geography, the politics, the history, the cultural conditions, the race, gender, religious makeup, right, of different spaces. And so this is we're gonna go through a few different frameworks to demonstrate the sort of dynamism. And then we're gonna land on one from which we're gonna really sort of wrestle and think and experiment and chew on together. I can't see most of you on the screen because I'm sharing. So if and as you have questions, please put them in the chat. Kozan's going to be keeping an eye on that. And also if there's something where you're like, you feel stuck and it doesn't feel like we're going to come back to it, please also, feel free to make a little wave or denote something with the reactions or something else.
If you can, raise your digital hand because it'll move you to the front of the slides and we'll be able to see you.
Yes, raise your digital hand. I haven't heard raise your digital hand. Okay, but this is a more like training than frontal, lecture. So let's do this together, right? So like be present and like use the reaction emojis and use the chat box a lot. Okay, let us begin. So Joanna Macy, amazing teacher that you heard from recently, and I'm sure many of you have studied different component parts of like her work and thinking, and and talk about ecosystems, right? Joanna Macy, there are so many pieces of her work that touch on, and I feel like, fingers in the dirt, fingers in the soil that really are grounded in ecosystem and ecologies. And Joanna Macy talks about this moment as the great turning, right? This is the moment where we shift, where we transition, where the old ways, right, are no longer going to serve us, and we need to find new ways of being and living on this planet, and other beings live on this planet, right? And I prefer that to like, ecological collapse, which is the term that I probably use far too much. Use the great turning. And so she has these 3 pillars or components of what that great turning is going to take, or what it will look like if we are able to like transform and manifest through this time, right? And she talks about 3 pieces: actions to slow down damage, structural alternatives, and shift in consciousness. Actions to slow down damage, structural alternatives, and shift in consciousness. So we can map that onto this diagram. And I know Kozan's encouraged us all to have pen and paper. So you may want to like draw tons of these because we're gonna use them a lot. If we were in a room together, we'd have it all on the wall and sticky notes and stuff like that. Okay, so slow down damage, structural alternatives, shift in consciousness. This is Joanna Macy's sort of formulation. And it's important that I'm going to be pulling in examples also from outside the US. And Joanna Macy spent some time studying, right, that she may have spoken about with communities in Southeast Asia, learning about how those communities were doing that. I'm always Savodaya community, right? Like there's like communities where she was learning from. And I do think that this is not our strength in like the West and the global North to think dynamically and systemically. So I think it's interesting to also be listening out to where people are learning this from and where we're looking to for examples. The Buddhist Peace Fellowship, some of you may know it, it's based out in the Bay. They have a program and a framework called Block Build B that I got to do, which was really extraordinary. I really encourage folks checking them out. And so they one of their kind of spiritual teachers and mentors amongst a range is Joanna Macy. And so they were taking that plus a more political orientation or sort of a more radical direct action, like, mass protest orientation. And they sort of transformed what Joanna Macy had brought into Block Build B, sort of an alliterative, easy way of thinking about it. Block being we're stopping bad things from happening. You can really think about it almost visually, right? Taking action against injustice, right? Stopping the bad things. Building, right? Like creating the good things. And you'll see this word alternatives come up a lot, and we'll get into that. And then B is that shift in consciousness, that personal transformation work, right? And hearing these quotes, there's so much of that, right? Like, be an actor with integrity, show up, right? Take the bodhisattva vows anyway, like be discerning, right? So there's this piece that is very much about the collective, and then very much about how am I choosing to show up. And so you can see that there too, Block Build B. So you're going to see they sort of map out similarly. Oh, which bay? The East Bay, the San Francisco Bay Area. Sorry, American, I'm not even on the West Coast, American hegemony. Oh, and then we have this third frame, and we're gonna, this one is, I learned this as part of some organizations like Sunrise, if not now, Cosecha, the Aini Institute and Momentum, which is a training program. They have a training called Movement Ecology, and it is, Aini is particularly built by and with indigenous leaders from South America, and second generation immigrants in the US from indigenous communities as well, and as well as like deep study of organizing and movements. And they came up with this framework, changing dominant institutions. So dominant institutions is going to be something we borrow from this, creating alternatives, and then personal transformation. And you can see that here. Right, so you see we have these three different frameworks that people have used based on learnings from different parts of the world, and different kinds of communities and wisdom. But they all sort of map onto each other sort of similarly. Right, they're all pointing towards the same notion. And so I've put them together here. There are many frameworks. I use one that is very popular with the Chilean poor people's movement, but this is, we're going to keep it simple. Block and transform, right? Oh, I didn't change the slide, sorry. Stopping injustice by stopping injustice and transforming dominant institutions. Sorry, I'll go edit this in a minute, but stopping injustice and transforming dominant institutions. And dominant institutions we can talk about, but in this case, very quickly thinking about the people that have power to dictate how our lives look on a sort of grand scale, right? So that's government, that's corporations, banks, fossil fuel companies, right? That's the dominant institution. So blocking and transforming dominant institutions, stopping the bad stuff in the Joanna Macy context, and also trying to like make good stuff happen in dominant institutions. Building alternatives, that word that we've heard a lot. And I like to think of that as creating the world as it should be, right? When the dominant institutions are not doing their job, how are we creating the world as it should be? How are we creating the alternatives that they're not providing? And then this idea of B, right? So blocking, building, B, this personal transformation. Any questions thus far? Or anything, Kozan, you want to add right now?
No, I think we're going to dig into examples, which will kind of flesh this out a bit. But no.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I see Dita, I think from Sweden. Oh my God, I'm loving where so many countries represented, saying modernity's emphasis on linear thinking, right, is like, right, limits us, right? And so I think, yes, one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today is how, right, these are cyclical, these are circles, these are moving, and we're not, the sort of the sense, this might be controversial, but the sense that there is like the path of, you know, the arc of history, like, you know, universe leads towards justice, right? This like moral arc that we're just bending. Like, I think that's like a pretty Western view, that it's like we're just going forward, right? Or a global north view. And that actually the world is more dynamic, politics is more dynamic, nature is more dynamic, right? So yeah.
Corinne, Judy had asked that we go back a slide real quick to re-show the indigenous perspective slide of what this looks
this
like.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is from Aini. So changing dominant institutions. And in that, they divide that one actually into a few component parts, but one of them is like mass protest, and one of them is from within. So sort of inside outside lives in that, within a sort of dominant political or financial sort of institutions.
Yeah, and it's something we've been talking a lot about that we may tease out in this conversation, which is you can kind of see the inside outside perspective or game or activity within each circle here. So like changing dominant institutions requires protests, but also requires people who are willing to pass new laws. Creating alternatives may be within institutions or new institutions that need to be created, or new kind of ways of being that need to be created. And then personal transformation, you know, there's a kind of internal aspect, which is developing right view or developing wisdom, we would say, and then right action, or kind of expressing that externally in some way. And then you could also see this more as kind of blocking institutions, blocking things that are in the way, building being the kind of, there doesn't have to be an inside and outside. This whole thing can be kind of holistic. So I think you were saying, Corinne, that this really emphasizes, this particular perspective really emphasizes that kind of inside outside aspect of our work.
Yeah. And I will say, and I would just say it quickly, that in some cultures, even the part here that says personal transformation is a little adapted by Aini from indigenous to a North American perspective. And that for many, that there is no personal transformation, like that is assumed that that's like something people are taking care of. And so like in the Chilean framework, they just have it, they split up one of these into two and have creating alternatives. But I do think in a North American context where we do not have practice shifting our own consciousness, even in our like old cultures, at like the sort of kind of European cultures that formed in this country, right? So that we actually have to have this personal transformation piece within the North American context, but within like the Chilean context, they kind of don't have that. They just focus on the collective. So it's a very interesting thing also, and shows also why we have different ecosystems for different cultural conditioning, different economic systems, right? That speak to what our needs are. So I'm gonna, this is where we are. So we did want to sort of see if people, based on that, any questions specifically on this or clarifications, but yeah, let's just try this on, right? A lot of this is trying it on at the beginning of a new view. Try it on and be like, what are the kinds of ways that you can think of or that you've seen people do this? So what is an example of blocking and transforming that folks have? And yeah, do we want to do digital hand?
Yeah, let's do some hands. If people have in the movement you're in, or kind of something you feel close to, what's an example of block? Or you can put it in the chat if you don't want to say it. Kelly, unmute you.
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Sorry. Well, the organization I'm on the board of, we use a lot of litigation, environmental litigation against agencies in the federal government and other people. So that's what we've been doing for the last 25 years.
It's a great example. The same here in New Mexico, the kind of environmental watchdog group, the most effective thing has been litigation. Marina.
Hi, everyone. I would add for block stopping injustice by like within institutions, for example, including sometimes I know people within government institutions may use also leverage the democracy or the bureaucracy of the democracy to sort of quote unquote slow roll policies rather than trying to institute or push through harmful policies that don't have the proper vetting or analysis, relative to like social, environmental, and governance issues.
Mm-hmm. So using the democratic process. So maybe one more block. Corinne, should we?
Yeah. Do one more.
Suizel?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Well, I just would say locally, we're seeing small towns choosing what comes in Western Massachusetts, where there's a lot of forest land, is that land is getting proposed to get purchased and then clear cut by solar farms. And the ways that towns are resisting that is by making sure they have a bylaw that's been adopted by whatever their town process is, that talks about beauty. Because part of the ways the laws are set up for things like green alternatives of solar is that, oh, you can't say not in my backyard. Basically, you can't come and I watched a town meeting, where the people came clearly to block that buying up of their very inhabited forest land and beauty. And the lawyers for these solar arrays saying, oh, you can't block us or we can sue you. And their lawyers standing up and say, oh, well, no, we have bylaws that speak to our need to have beauty. And so we can ask you to identify already cleared spaces instead of clearing more forests. So we have signs everywhere. We need solar and we need forests. So there's something about getting the towns at the local levels to adopt bylaws that can help block those sweeping powers that some of these out-of-state green alternatives come in. And then the town doesn't even get any of it. It goes to some other far away place.
And you're also you're pointing to the power of local government. I mean, to just be involved at a very local level, there's a lot of power to block things that are shifting in the wrong direction. Yeah.
I saw this is all great. I'm seeing some in the chat that's like literally blocking, right? And that is, yes. And that is definitely what the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, where they were coming from. We got some Greenpeace people there. We've got the people that hang off the bridges at BPF. So yeah, very much, right? Like sitting in the road, stopping things from happening, mass protest. I want to acknowledge that there was a question up here from Kelly about what about when our movements or organizations need transforming? I will get to that, but we're going to think about this in this framework in the context right now of the dominant institutions, but I'm very happy. I think about this a lot. Cool. Should we do the building alternatives?
Yeah. So what are some examples of building? Creating the world as it should be, or as we want to see it, as we want to embody it? What do people think?
Yes, beautiful. Offering transitional foster care for unaccompanied minor refugees. Absolutely. So much of the work with refugees, doing the work that the state won't do. I love that. I don't love that we need it, but I love that there are people showing up for it. Cooperative systems, very much so. People can also put up their hands again, but I'm happy to be reading these.
Yeah, and Isel also offered should carries the assumption that we know what's best, which kind of brings us to B. So we'll get to that in a second. It's a great point. Any of these popping out to you, Corinne?
Community supported agriculture, adding residential solar, absolutely. Acting locally, yes. I think scale is going to be something we really think about here. So like having food banks, right? Food banks, again, are making sure that people are fed. Cultural reclamation, mutual aid, yes, land back, non-extractive grant making. Would more of that be so? Yes. Yes, fine. So yes, a lot of what's happening here when you can see it when is about collective community providing things, whether that's food, whether that's I'm seeing education, whether that's housing, whether that's shelter, whether that's farming, right? Providing things for communities, providing things for people. And we're going to talk about this in the context of power shortly. And then what about, yes, I'm seeing right here, offering and organizing spaces for community-based decision-making, right? People's assemblies. I've been reading and deeply about the International Women's Strike and all the people's assemblies, and I'm just swooning. Oh yes, Hannah, I've been following this, the trespass in the UK. That's a block, I think, but trespass in the UK, where people are going into private land and like camping there and stuff like that to demonstrate that all this private land is being withheld from the public. Yes, beautiful. Okay, should we do, so then B, let's move to B, and then we'll look at these examples and some others. What are some ways that this is a good group for this. What are some ways that we can be doing this?
We should know this one.
Yeah, the cultivating, right, and bringing right view, right action into the world. What does that look like? How do we do the personal transformation?
Deep listening, says Steve.
Yeah.
Steve and Marina.
Grief.
As Tova Green shared with us last year, deep listening as being. Tracy, you said taking back attention from the attention economy. Well, say more about how that's the practice of being. Zoe says reading standing at the edge teaches how to be.
That's a big one for me. I'm all empathic distress. I have to move away from that edge all the time.
Nancy Wright, recognizing bias and privilege. So what are some of the practices that we think are under B? Like, what are some of the activities that we do that help us with just that, Nancy, like to recognize, as Isel said earlier, should is a very loaded notion, and yet we have to act. So how do we act with some sense of clarity? What are the practices we do?
I saw somatic practice, Tonglen, bearing witness, yes, the 3 tenets, awareness, metta, healing.
Grace training.
Yeah. And then I like this here too, right? Staying away from single-use plastic, that there is also these actions, right? That in the 3 tenets, we have the right action there. Study Zazen, more Zazen.
Jukai.
Gratitude, yeah, gratitude practice. Being with my dog in nature, yes.
Dedicating the merit, it's a great one.
Recognizing into being. Ask, how did I get here and what am I willing to give up? I love that. I love these all. Creative practices, yes, we are full beings. We are full beings with joy and things to celebrate. All right, I'm gonna move it. These are beautiful. So please do be like writing these down. I'm going to give some examples that I was thinking of, some of which you've touched upon, and then we're going to go into an example, into like kind of, yeah, zooming in. So block and transform. So some of you mentioned, like I saw Keystone Pipeline protests in there. This is the top picture is from, I think, the Green New Deal, a protest for a Green New Deal. I think this is actually the school strike when they were all the big school strikes that were happening a couple of years ago. We have a picture of Congress I had it before. It was like how a bill becomes a law, but that felt silly. But right, like some of this we're actually talking about is actually happening within the state, within the dominant institutions. The picture at the bottom is from Chile. Actually, I'm a little obsessed, but because they're just doing incredible work. And from the feminists, the 8M feminist, 8th of March feminist march that was there, that was part of the International Women's Strike. So you see like strike, right? Like the striking, the withholding of our labor is one form of protest, right? Women saying, no, I'm not actually gonna perform whatever it is, the social production work, reproduction work that I do. There's young people, right, talking about the climate, talking about the planet, asking for a Green New Deal in the streets. And then there's also this component that is legislative, right? A lot is wrapped up in that. The legislative, elections, that sort of thing.
Corinne, before we go to the next slide, Janet, I think, has a great question, which is, wouldn't this block apply to the January 6th insurrection?
Absolutely.
So, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I would love to. I think one of the, it's incredibly important, right, to know that everyone is organizing and that movements are not just belonging to progressives or to those that we consider, you know, those of us who we believe we're like righteous and have like this cultivated moral view of how the world should be. So movements belong, you know, movements are a way that people behave and the way that it is an ecosystem, right? And ecosystems can function in many ways, right? And so I think it's incredibly important that we actually notice when those that in an organizing sense, not in a spiritual sense, but in an organizing sense, I think of my political opponents, we are looking at the kind of organizing that they are doing. Why does it speak to people? Why is it motivating people? How are they operating within this ecosystem, right? For a long time, progressives were not great at getting people into roles at the Board of Education, right? Whereas the sort of political right, let's call it, or conservatives were much more organized at getting people into every position of government, all the way from grassroots to the top. And I think it is really important to see that. So yes, January 6th, in theory, was that. I mean, was this in its sort of basic notion, in the notion that it was doing it, they might argue for the common good, but I don't think so, right? There was many, many problems with it, but yeah. And I think that it's an important thing to think about, which is like, that's the right view cultivation, right? Which is like, what's motivating us? Who is this for? I think there was like, how did I get here? How am I participating? That's the part that makes our ecosystem, I think, the healthy, fertile, generative one, as opposed to the destructive, imploding, insular, narrow one.
Yeah. And just how stark that example is that you give, Janet, of like, oh, this is an example of block that like I'm not in solidarity with. So what am I in solidarity with? Like, who am I standing with? And I don't think that detracts from the broader awareness that even that activity on Capitol Hill on January 6th is not separate from what we may be doing in the world, from our activism. You know, there have been tactics like that used by people we may feel that we're standing with. So how does one lead to the next, right? How does our activity lead to a reaction or lead to an ecosystem that very much includes those we may see as our opponents or who we're not standing with? So there's both seeing the broader web in which that's not separate either, and developing the sense of who am I standing with? You know, who are my people?
I saw these comments and I'm just wondering if I'm seeing Eileen, Miranda, and Janet. I'm like, based on reality or based on propaganda? I'm not sure if that's about the working class piece, but if folks want to elucidate more, I will say to Eileen's point, like, I think that one thing I will say is that progressives is like a big category, right? Like it's just a big category of people. And I think one of the things I like to think about a lot is how much is happening that I don't know about. And I love when I discover all the things that are happening that I don't know about, right? But this idea that like progressives are not good at working class and they can be elitists, I think that that can be true. And also, I think there is a way in which we allow that to be true, right? By sort of believing that, right? We know that actually the median income of the people that were there on January 6th was actually pretty high. Those were middle and upper middle class people. There were people that were flying their own private planes to DC. And we also know that, there's a lot of amazing rural organizing going on by progressives, and that people actually don't fit into these neat categories, even as I'm using them as shorthand, right? So there are like incredible alliances that are possible. And we don't always do a great job, broadly speaking, as progressives. And also there's so much lying beneath the surface. And so I just encourage us to all of us kind of avoid, like myself included, and especially the kind of generalizations, because we're missing something, I think, when we're not actually always seeing what's right in front of us. I mean, the Pennsylvania race where you have Dr. Oz and John Fetterman running for Senate there might be the clearest example of that. Okay, so I'm going to move on from block and transform, and we just have lots of time so we can come back and keep chewing on this. So build, and I saw someone say, I think mutual aid, the welcoming, right? And I saw the comment about this question of should, but the idea that we take care of each other, right? And that in this society, we pay taxes, and there's an expectation that that's part of the agreement that we will get services back in return. Of course, that's not like, a super like American way of thinking, but that is like part of the idea, right? And so when our communities are not offering the kind of education that we're looking for, when they're not offering access to medication, to financial resources, when there's not food, then how this build piece is the way in which community and collectives can do that work. And it's often seen as, and this is different than charity, right? The idea behind mutual aid, right, is one, there is a word in there, mutuality, is that it's actually building something and it's bringing people together. It's not just saying, here's your food, I'll never see you again, right? Which is like also an important thing people can do, but it's actually saying, hey, back in the day, we used to actually have mutual aid societies, right? Do you want to join this like community and this collective? Do you want to help make things? Do you want to help participate in this? And we grow the bonds, right? So much of this is about the relational, I saw someone say, right? How can the relationship between people in their own community be stronger? This is where this thing all fits together, so that we may be maybe also advocating in the streets, protesting for a piece of legislation around food and hunger and housing, right? We're becoming stronger with each other. We're building our web in order that we also may be able to participate in other parts of the ecosystem, right? So the examples here, the one, we have this mutual aid during COVID, right? That was like, we're still in COVID, during the sort of height of lockdowns. And when people couldn't go to work, we saw an enormous amount of people filling those gaps, right? Filling the gaps of making sure people are fed. In New York, this former direct action block, hardcore block, like on scaling buildings, activist Sandy Nurse led with a community called Mayday Space, a huge mutual aid network in Bushwick, Brooklyn. She's now a city councilor. We're going to see how these things start fitting together. Other examples here, there were many that folks mentioned, refugee support, that kind of thing. We also have public banks here, right? What if actually we owned our own money? That seems like a nice thing. And then the bottom, Chile again, Farmacia Popular, it's these people's pharmacies where the collective gets together and bargains and negotiates prices for pharmaceuticals, making them cheaper, and then opens pharmacies so that people can afford medication. right? Like the ways that we could actually be thinking about ways that we provide and build community and take care of each other's needs. When we look globally, there's so many things we can be doing. We could be doing a people's pharmacy, right? So like, these are the kinds of things in building alternatives. I'm seeing, are there questions or anything to add here? I'm seeing a lot about, did I say AOC? Did I?
There's a lot about AOC, who's a congressperson. I think
Oh.
that's been.
Okay, that wasn't about, I was like, did I say that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. So
Kelly, do you have a question?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, jump in.
I have a comment, I think, which is probably, Corinne, going to go into the B part, which is sort of this awareness of this, we're all in this together. And unless and until we're sort of in an actual collective situation where we have dismantled the structures of inequality and the patriarchy and white supremacy, we are in fact not all in this together in the same way, right? So I can, oh, I'm really nervous. My voice is shaking, sorry. So I can like jump into the street. I live in Brooklyn too. So I can jump into the street and I can have my placard and I can be really angry and I can show up for injustice. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to my highways. I'm not going to go into the communities that are actually living this level of injustice and inequality that we're all talking about here, that we want to dismantle and reimagine, right? So I think that that's something really important for all of us here who maybe the majority of us are sitting in places of real privilege. And so kind of a blithe kumbaya kind of, you know, like in a way that bypasses lived experiences, I think is especially if you look like me, is really, really important to be aware of.
Oh, yes. Kelly, and let's hang out in Brooklyn. Anyone in Brooklyn, let's all hang out. Yes, I appreciate that. There's so much richness in there. Where I'm going to say a couple of things, see if Kozan wants to add anything. And let's like also just hold that, right? That part, we're going to ask some questions that are self-reflective about where am I in this ecosystem based on my positional privilege, right? My social privilege, my experience. Also, what are the places where everyone, right? 53% of the population of North America have uteruses or some form of can be pregnant at some point in their life. I'm like, I've never come at it in that direction, right? But are people for whom the getting rid of Roe v. Wade and other pieces of legislation are going to be incredibly problematic. We all breathe air. We all, right? Some of us are in more environmentally unjust places by a long stretch, right? But I think it's like holding both of these things, right? Like in some ways there are things that touch all of us, and in some ways we are absolutely, like not all of us, and I don't know everyone's background here. We are all in different places. We are all positioned differently within like a social spectrum. So deeply, yes, in B, there is this question of how do we use ourselves and how do we cultivate that kind of view, right? That thinks about like who we are. And I think Chris also had that question, right? What is my story, right? Where am I from? What am I seeing? What are my privileges? What are my conditions? And how do I act from that? Right. And that is right. We've got these three tenets. So actually the top picture here is from a peacemaker's retreat. In terms of B and personal transformation, right? Like how do we actually sit and think about also our relationship to historic wrongs, right? That's part of like the reparations movement. How do we think, again, not just thinking linearly and ahead, right? How do we think about ourselves globally, right? Within a United States and North American context relative to global South. We have things we can do in our homes, right? Which is like harvesting rainwater, right? These are like things that we can do that when we have right view, we can like be cultivating this right action. We can use less, we can tread more lightly on the world in some ways, right? In our carbon footprint. We can also think about how do we use our material resources. I have a couple more things to say, but I saw that Judy has her hand raised, so would love for you to go.
Hi, good morning or afternoon. Thank you. I was thinking about B from a more subversive lens, actually. And it brings me back to Joanna Macy and the Shambhala warrior legend, which is the foundation of all the work that I do, which is to think about those of us who are in positions of power and in places of power. I work in the law, and I get a chance to talk to a lot of lawyers who have a lot of power, and creating personal transformation in those groups, partly for well-being, which is almost always why I'm invited, but subverting that or changing that conversation a little bit and really inviting them to consider things like, who are you saying yes to? And how can you say no? And how can you have a more appropriate influence in the world right now?
Absolutely. I love the subversive. I hope there's a subversive in each of these block build B, but yes, absolutely, right? What are the relationships, right, that comes with when we've done the cultivating work and we know that's ongoing, and what are the relationships that we have access to because of the access we have in our lives? Yeah, what do we do with those? Absolutely. I think that is so true. I saw some questions, this question of like, how do I know where to be? What is the question of my work? And I think one of the things, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that. Like we'll be breaking out into groups of that. But I think one of the, it's not, I think there's a few things. One is that my work can be varied, right? Based on the conditions in my life, based on what is going on for me, based on what is going on for one of the many ways actually that people across, other than the sort of mostly very, very wealthy are dealing with, is the sort of lack of care supports and care systems in our society, right? So we have a lot of people in the sandwich generation who are doing senior care, elder care for parents or for people in their lives, and also childcare, right? And so like when that is happening in your life, you might not be able, you may still hold some societal privileges, but in that moment, maybe what you're doing is using your voice as a caregiver, right? As a person experiencing that system to speak with that voice and go to like protest or advocate for that piece of legislation. So sometimes your work may change based on where you're sitting, also both in your conditions, not just in the sort of material resourced conditions. And there is a place, that question of like, both what am I moved to? And this is what we talked about a little bit in December, I think it was, of like, and what is needed right now, right? And that is this practice, right? That is these tenets. What is needed in this moment? And maybe that's going to cause a little discomfort for us, right? That's going to say, some moments call for my privileged body to be at the front of the line, actually, right? They're saying, please, we actually want white bodies. We want bodies that the police is going to less hurt at the front of the line. And sometimes that's stepping back, right? Sometimes that's being there to house or to shelter. What is the thing I can do right now? And maybe there's a few things I can do. And also that may shift in the ecosystem, right? There are times also, we'll talk about this at the end, but like, if you're always going in for the fight, right? I'm a direct action person, we'd call it a direct action head, right? I often encourage people that only protest and bring like this energy to be like, what's going on for you there? You know, like just as we might say, get off the cushion and into the world, or get off the yoga mat and into the world. I think there's the same question of like, what is it that always has you in the front of the room or the front of the fight or the front, you know, in that posture? So I think there's a lot of self-reflection that we can be doing about where we want to place ourselves. How's everyone doing? Good? All right? Yeah. Oh, Monica.
Monica. You able to unmute here? Let me. There you
Okay.
go.
So I was thinking too about folks who are, I'm just thinking of my own work the past couple of years supporting folks who are organizers, specifically women of color, and thinking about like the level of responsibility also that people sort of internalize or project onto others, and how that impacts your way to organize, or even just kind of think about like integrating a framework like this. I think it's really challenging. And there's so much of a responsibility, I think, that is like, I have to do this for us.
Mhm.
And I wonder, like, you know, how is there equity in that? Or how is that transformed?
That's like what a, huge question. Like, there's no right or wrong question, but I'm like, yeah, that question resonates with me so much. Because I do think that, well, one, our organizations and our movements and our social justice spaces are deeply imperfect, right? As we all are, and as this, because they're existing within a system. And so I think one is acknowledging that within the choices that we are making are within a set of real conditions, like a reality. So I think that that is true. I think that there is, and this is like, we could talk about your question. Like, I mean, these are the juicy questions, I think that there is a sense of, we can ask people, we can be asking. I think at the core of organizing, like the first principle island is curiosity. And I think there's a lot of telling and not a lot of asking and saying like, are you tired? Like, do you want to be, why are you here? Like, why do you find yourself where you are? Can I support you to step out? Right? There is also like the supporting, why do we do things in collective? Because sometimes we can't always be doing the work. And I think there are two sides to the sort of the burden that people feel, right? There's a side of it that I experienced at some point. I think I talked about this in December, that was like the kind of self view, right? Like that I was like, if not me, who's going to do it? I'm like, obviously the best equipped for this, or just like, am I not a worthwhile person if I'm not at the front? But this idea that it's somehow like about me, like in that sort of egoic sense. And for me, that was practice all the way. I saw a tweet the other day that was like, careers and the career path is like, I want to be in the meeting, I want to run the meeting, please don't invite me to your meeting. And like, I don't want to be in the meeting. And I'm like, yes, right? There was a time where I was like, I could do this better, why not me? And now I'm like, God, but that was practice, right? Like that was practicing. I don't have to be at this meeting. I don't have to speak. I don't have to be at this protest. But sometimes I do have to, and it is the practice that allows us to know ourselves enough to know when I'm just trying to like bypass, right? And when actually I need rest. When I'm not going to be useful to people. When I'm really unrested, don't put me anywhere near a place where police are going to be, because I am unskillful. I bet cousin can really believe that I am unskillful. And I know that I'm working on it. And then there's the part where people feel the burden, because I think we've started to confuse the idea that our analysis should be very clear on racial injustice, on gender injustice, on ableism, on ageism, right? Like that's an analysis that we bring that has become replaced with, and I hear this all the time, we need to send to the leadership of people of color, but in organizations where there are very few people of color. And so what does that mean? That means like, oh, here are I want the solution to already be ready for me, versus why is my organization an organization that is not serving the full diversity of my community first, before I then say, oh, here are the 3 people of color, you now have to speak at every event because we're doing the right thing, right? And I don't know, I see that a lot. So, and I see that with women, right? So I think that it comes from multiple directions. Some of them in our organizations where we need to allow ourselves to take time to do it better and serve who we say we're serving. Maybe step out of the way if we're not serving. And then some of it is that practice and working around that kind of like egoic self piece.
So Corinne, I just want to do a time check because I know we want to break out in like 10, 15 minutes, so no rush. And just on this B slide, I think we could spend a lot of time here. I think most of us think a lot about how this is important and how this shows up in our life. That's, as you indicated at the beginning, maybe a couple things just to kind of simplify, because we're gonna do this on our own. So what are we talking about when we're talking about B? The things you've touched on are that there's an aspect of personal transformation. There's an aspect of like seeing clearly, which requires stepping back and getting to know our own patterns and when our own privilege, our own places where we are exhausted or are capable, but all that work is ongoing. I think one place we know we get stuck is thinking that like there's an endpoint where we're going to finally like be ready to go out there and do the work. And we know that if we don't step back and have this as a co-equal part of our activity in the world, that we can do a lot of damage. We can go out there with a myopic view or with exhaustion, or always kind of showing up in the kind of trying to get the same thing done, even as the ecosystem constantly is evolving. So if we don't do this, there can be confusion and problems we create. And if we think we're going to do this until we figure it out, we'll never get out into the world to be of service. So that's kind of what we're noticing here in this one. And I love that the Bearing Witness Retreat is the first photo you put in, Corinne, because I think that's like a reminder that this may just be stepping back to resource ourselves and get enough sleep and being in nature, but it's also creating enough space that we can have that we can really allow ourselves to transform, to fall apart, to see things differently, that like there's a depth in this that's about our practice. So I know there's a, yeah.
I was also just thinking, yeah, that idea of being attached to outcome. I'm just thinking about all the different quotes that you chose. I feel like I want them. I'm like this, we could like, I'm gonna start weaving them into this training. But yeah, the quote around like you don't have to do the fixing yourself, right? Like is also in Torah, in Jewish text, right? Ours is not to like complete the task, but we're not ours is not to complete the task, but you're not free to avoid it either. Right? Like these wisdoms show up in so many also of our traditions. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit, I think maybe we'll go faster on this so that there's more time in the groups.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so we're going to do a wee little case study on climate justice. And maybe because we talked about this, I'm just going to go through to the actual examples. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So on this, so we have this block and transform. And nope, there. Block and transform. So I put Sunrise. Some of you may have heard of that organization. So the organization itself, I should say, lives within some organizations, and this is a good thing, live within one of these buckets. And sometimes a problem can be, and I saw like skills and resources, where am I needed? Sometimes I see this a lot, that organizations see something trending and funders, right? The money often follows a trend. And so then organizations follow also, or they feel like, oh, I've been doing this kind of work, but now everyone's in the streets on this kind of work. So I need to now go over here. Sunrise is a great example of a group that sees itself firmly in block and transform. Now within that, they do a few things. they do mobilizing, and they, you know, the sort of protest, the hard blocking, and they also do work around elections, right? Electing climate champions. But they're there, right? They know that their job is not also then to build the like Sunrise Bicycle Club and also do Sunrise Land Trust. Maybe some of their people do, but this is where they live. And that idea, that's the kind of inside outside that we're going to keep sort of touching on. There was this, I don't know how many of you have heard the expression like moving the Overton window, Overton. That became very popular in the last few years. Again, speaking of trends, or you have the Overton window speaks to a study of which, like, what is the kind of where like public opinion has like, what's the window of public opinion? And so shifting the Overton window, this window of public opinion, moving that towards like your cause was seen as like almost an end in and of itself, right? I want popular opinion to be on my side. The polls say that everyone agrees with me, right? Well, polls have no power, right? Public opinion doesn't actually have power, right? Like public opinion doesn't necessarily make decisions. And so that's why, right, you can have the Green New Deal or climate justice be very popular, but we also need to elect climate champions, right? People that will work at every level, not just in Congress or in the presidency, but at every single level to put climate into their legislative agenda, right? Into their policy agenda, right? And so this is the way that we have in this Block and Transform. The protest is good at shifting public opinion, at making it clear, at maybe actually stopping some real bad shit from happening, but also, right, for that to be long-standing, for that to sink into like the soil, so to speak, right, we need to give it legislative litigation, right? They need to be laws, there need to be policies that turn these things into reality. So yeah, I put some other things there, Standing Rock protests, right? Passing climate bills. You'll see these like inside, outside, stopping bad things can turn into good things, right? In the climate context, in this building alternatives, community gardens, community farms, I heard lots of these were around a lot, like the sort of environmental climate justice is a great space for this sort of building alternatives, right? Land reclamation, the trespass, but also community trusts, right? So who does that land back, right? Land back to the people who are stewards of that land, indigenous native communities, community solar projects, right? Public banks would live there also that like fund solar projects. And then in that third one, we talk about like, right, there's this personal view piece, right? The practice, the bearing witness, and also the shifting, the right action, right? Doing like a Meatless Monday thing or recycling, collecting rainwater, how you spend your money, right? That is in that B, but always with that cultivation of that personal transformation. Also knowing that like our actions ideally are also like shaping our views and back and forth, right? So this is the way that you can map it onto block will be the climate. Yes, I saw there's a question.
Hannah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. There we go.
Hi, thank you. Brilliant session, by the way, riveting. I have a bit of an issue, or I want to ask about this issue. For me, what's happening at this stage in the way that you are allocating things across the three is that the B is all becoming local and personal, and the block is all becoming systemic. And as a 30-year journalist, activist, whatever, PR, political comm strategist on the climate agenda, for me, I'm sort of with Michael Mann on the fact that personal stuff matters, particularly from a day-to-day motivation point of view and from showing up. But the real change has to be systemic and very, very fast at scale. So I sort of have a problem with, if we can't manage the purple and the pink at systemic level, and what does that look like?
Absolutely. So this is why we need to do it all, right? And so I think that in the sense of like Joanna Macy's sense or others, some of these on the B that is like the right action is just an expression of that right view. But the reason, what in part, right, we sometimes try to move systems before we've actually shifted. Like systems are full of people and institutions are full of people, right? And so part of that is like, what are the ways, but we do not stop there, but what are the ways that cultivating that personal transformation allows either brings more people into a movement who aren't going to start like with Extinction Rebellion or whatever, right? Like they're not going to start by gluing themselves to the street, although I'm super into some of those sometimes, right? But there's not necessarily, that's not where everyone's going to show up, right? So part of it is also, what are the actions that allow us to invite people in, right? Oh, the people that are thinking about not eating meat because of their carbon footprint, I want to talk to those people, right? I want to invite them in. So these are also indicators for us of like, who's thinking, who's being more mindful, who's a person I can invite into a bigger organization doing the systemic work. And then there is also the personal cultivation, right? I am no good at Standing Rock if I have not done the personal practice. And we saw that from the people who showed up at Standing Rock who were no good because they didn't have a practice.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a bit of both of those things.
I'm reminded, I think I've told most of you I used to work at a political organizing shop that kind of incubated large scale single issue movements or groups, advocacy groups. And we saw this from the first perspective Corinne's offering, which was like, we need to give people things they can do. You call it an engagement ladder. You start them low, you go higher. If you're not engaged on some level, recycling rainwater, eating less meat, whatever it is, you're not going to feel like you want to engage at a bigger level. Showing up at a protest, giving money, whatever it is. That's a very kind of a social science rational way to look at it. And it, it works. You can run a system that way. I think I've come to believe it's far more kind of important in the long run that we include and maybe emphasize the other view you're offering, which is, if we don't feel in our daily activity connected to the big systemic change, we won't be able to, we won't feel resourced to show up day after day, year after year, decade after decade, by the deep importance that it has for us in the feeling of being connected to this whole ecosystem, right? That's lived day to day. And so it's not just kind of walking our talk or living our values, although that's important. It's feeling that we are in this together in kind of one web. And I think that's very much, to your question, you can't separate the two on some level. You can't have one without the other.
I think that is why our movements are so brittle, right? And I see it all the time. And I spend a lot of time with a group called Faith Matters Network. We have a project called Rooted in Resilience. And what we often see is this sort of brittleness because people are showing up with all their anger, with all their rage, with all their histories, with all their selfing, with all their trauma, like all, and they're wanting the movement, they're not even necessarily consciously wanting it, but this is meant to be a space where none of that, like where that stuff can just get sorted out, right? Or where, but I just want to take action, right? And so many of like fights and breakdowns are happening because of the fact that we aren't all doing our personal work. And that these are happening together, and that we support each other to do that. It's not like, don't come back to the meeting until you figured it out, so you've done like a year of silent meditation. It's like, how do we do that together, right? How do we create the conditions in our movements for that kind of practice, right? Like, and this is a lot. Each of us are one person. That's why we find ourselves in the ecosystem. We move around it. We learn about ourselves. This is like a big thing we're trying to do, right? This is what Joanna Macy, the great turning. This is it, like this is one of the big struggles for our time. And we need spiritual fortitude to be able to withstand, maintain our groups, and actually move forwards together. I do just want to say on the build piece, I think that there is a question, well, there is a question around all of these, right? But certainly with build and with B, but what is the what is your like political perspective? How are you thinking about why and what it is you're doing with these projects, right? So like, to me, the point of bicycle curbs at minimum, right? And also, again, right, in any movement ever recorded through all of history, we're talking about maybe like 10% of the public actually like would ever be in this block build space. Maybe that would be the maximum ever, maybe close to 5%. That might feel depressing, but that means it's like within reach, you know? But like, one, we actually do need less cars. When there are less cars, then more bicycles or more public transit, right? People have a different experience of things being possible that weren't possible before. So part of build is showing that something is possible, the world as it should be is possible, that people don't know how to envision. I see this all the time. In New York and in other cities when it actually comes to environmental justice, right? So like, so part of that work is like helping us see more clearly, right? Oh, like this is I always talk about this, right? Because in Paris over COVID, the lockdown in Paris, they just got rid of like tons of their roads and turned them into bike lanes. In Italy, they gave everyone a 200 euro voucher to buy a new bicycle during lockdown. These things are just possible, right? So that came from this, those two things came from the government. But like, you can also just, what would it look like if you're just, we have them, right? It's block parties in New York where you just are like, no cars on the road today. What becomes possible when we see like how we can be together differently? That's what mutual aid does, right? That's what community fridges do. So part of it is also that, right? I think in the UK context, the like clap that happened once a week for the NHS workers, for the health workers there, felt so hollow for many people and for the workers because they didn't feel like it was matched by anything else, right? And so that wasn't really any of these things in the ecosystem. It was a gesture, right? And we're saying moving from gesture to action, moving from action to collective action and collective systemic change. Does that help?
I missed a little bit of that because my internet is choppy all of a sudden, but I want us, we're getting into this place, particularly in the chat, where we're realizing there is not one version of this graph, right? There's not one version of this view that we're all going to land on and agree to and say, this is how it looks. This is a tool for us, and it can really be used as a tool for a group of us working on a similar issue or in a similar location, but it can also just be very personal. Like, how do I understand my own work in the world, where I locate myself, where I can be of use, where I should step back, what it means to build, to block, to be. So instead of like trying to get to consensus, which I don't think we're going to get to, we're going to break out and just to share what this brings up for us and where we find ourselves. So in the build, block, be paradigm, when we're finding ourselves in service in the world, in our activism or otherwise, where do we usually gravitate to? Are we trying to block something? Are we on the streets? Are we trying to build something new? Are we the kind of entrepreneur or kind of out there engineering some new way to do things? Are we in the B space usually? So the question is kind of, where do you find yourself and why? What does that feel like? And what might it look like to extend into other areas for yourself? And what would that look like? And this isn't like a problem to solve. There's not going to be like a right answer here, but just to have some space for us to share how unique and individual this framework is supposed to be, right? How do we show up to it? So we're going to break out. Is that all right, Corinne, if we break out? We're running out of time.
Yes, please.
Okay. So here are the questions on the slide. And we're going to break out into groups of 4 and just take 4 minutes for each person to share. And this is a cross section. This is kind of first thought, best thought. This framework may be totally new to you. Tomorrow you may think, actually, I don't show up where I said I did. This is how I show up. But get the juices moving and start thinking about how this applies to your life and to how you show up in the world. And Noah, are you able to break us out? You're much better at this than I am.
Sure, 4, right? 4 per.
4, and if you would keep those of us facilitating from the groups, that would be great, so we can plan the next piece.
Yes, co-hosts will not be in the groups.
Wonderful.
So it has to be arranged 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. What's the ideal?
I think 3 to 4. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
And if if you would loosely keep time for yourselves, are we able to put a clock up on top?
Yep.
Noah? Okay, so you'll see a clock counting down 4 minutes, and then we'll come back together and share a little bit of what came up.